The delay, we're still waiting for that ground offensive. I wonder what you think about that. We can only, well, make educated guesses about that. And I guess, what do you think? They must be scoping out the terrain, planning, allowing more time for evacuations and so on.
Yes, well, I hope we're using this gap sensibly. I think we are, John. There's a huge amount of diplomatic, political, humanitarian, intelligence activity going on behind. A major offensive, and I was there for the first Gulf War, second Gulf War, is a major undertaking. The straight, sheer logistic movement of men, materiel, equipment, setting up hospitals, dressing stations, ammunition dumps, all that, I'd say, ghastly paraphernalia of large-scale warfare. The hope is that in and among this, the diplomatic and lines of communication are open in a way that keeps the prospect of a greater conflagration across the Middle East at a time when, inevitably, I say this from a very Western perspective, we have the issue of Russia, we have the issue of Ukraine, we have the issue of climate change, global warming, you name this. We've got Iranian influence, we've got Chinese competition, etc. This is not a good time. This is one of those awful sort of confluences of really tricky problems.
Yeah, and they are everywhere you look, aren't they, Simon? I mean, we see now the Israeli Defense Forces striking at what's described as Hamas's infrastructure, by which I think they mean the tunnels which are used to move troops and material by Hamas to where they want them. The great worry about that is the number of civilian casualties that go with those strikes. Of course, it is also degrading Hamas's capacity to fight and to fight back.
Yes, and this is the awful situation we find ourselves in. The Hamas's initial attacks on the 9th of the 7th of October. The response to that, the misdirected jihad missile on the hospital, and another round of violence in this awful macabre dance of death we've had for decades. More widows, more orphans, more disabled, and people having to play out these parts again. Undoubtedly, they are trying to. The Israelis would like. Clearly, they're conscious of the battle of narratives. They're conscious of social media battles out there. They're conscious of world opinion. They're conscious of the opinion of their main supporters, the United States in particular, but Britain as well. They're conscious also of the humanitarian aspect. Their fight is definitely with Hamas and the leaders, the planners of Hamas. So in many ways, that's what they're trying to do, is clear northern Gaza as a place for civilians in order to make it a more conventional battlefield for them. But this is the awful arithmetic of war.
But the battlefield is going to stray into those densely populated urban areas, which have only been partially evacuated, of course, Simon. When that advance inevitably comes into those urban areas, how far is it going to be possible to minimise civilian deaths?
Very, very difficult. This is the nature of urban warfare, John, and you're a student of military history. And even more recently, you look at Mariupol and some of the fighting in Ukraine. You look at Mosul, the taking of Mosul. You look at Fallujah with the Americans. It is frightfully difficult. And actually, you almost need when you're doing conventional armies, you either declare free cities or you encourage your own citizens to leave. The trouble with Hamas is, of course, it would in a macabre way want to keep civilians there precisely so that they do become casualties and they can be used again in the whole propaganda battle of the narratives. Yes. It's a really difficult conundrum for the Israelis, because going in there, as David Petraeus always used to say to us when we were with him in Iraq and Afghanistan, or say to the politicians, "Tell me how this ends." We have no problem doing our military bit. It'll be bloody, it'll be a grind, it'll be a slaughter in its own way. But it's Clausewitz, it's politics by other means. Where do you want to end up at the end of this? And the whole idea of Israel going back in and achieving a destruction of Hamas in order to then have to take over Gaza Strip is a whole raft of other issues that you'll have many commentators will have commented on or reported on, John.
Yes.